the President of Iraq. Without any further ado, Barham Saleh.
Thank you, Fareed. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum representing my country. Under the visionary leadership of Professor Schwab, this gathering has become the foremost event in the world to address global and regional challenges. It shows what can be achieved through common action, common purpose, and common resolve. And it is a venue for serious conversation about how to achieve our most aspirational goals. No one in this room, ladies and gentlemen, however, will be surprised when I say candidly that my country is going through really difficult and tough challenges. Protesters, mostly young Iraqis, have been demonstrating in the streets for nearly 4 months, putting their lives on the line to demand change. They have deep desires and demands for economic opportunities and for a homeland, and to have their voices heard and answered. At the same time, escalating regional conflict is threatening our sovereignty. We are truly in the eye of the storm. However, I have confidence that Iraq can rise to these challenges rather than fall prey to them. We can still emerge a better, stronger, more cohesive, and more prosperous country. In my speech to the United Nations in September, I laid out a vision of hope and prosperity for the future of Iraq and the Middle East, while recognizing the fragility of our hard-won stability and security at the time. We had much to be hopeful about. The scourge of Daesh had been defeated thanks to the sacrifices of Iraqi forces, the Iraqi military, Hashd al-Sha'bi, Peshmerga, and other units, and with the support of the international community. Iraq stood on the threshold of a new era, one where internal wounds could finally heal, where we could finally move past decades of wars, sanctions, and atrocities, and where we could work collectively towards economic and social vitality that Iraqis so desperately deserved. My vision then, and still is now for Iraq, that sits at the heart of the Middle East, is to be a force for stability and a bridge for a greater economic integration in the region. However, escalating tensions between Iran, Gulf countries, and the United States over the past months have reminded us that our ambitions remain vulnerable to politics of conflict beyond our control and to unwelcome foreign interferences. We truly, by definition of our own interest, need to seek good relations with all, and we have no interest in being dragged into conflicts not of our own choice or making. If our neighbors and our allies remain at loggerheads, our sovereignty is not respected and our territory is used as a battleground, then we cannot hope to achieve our own agenda of change and reforms. Iraq owes a debt of gratitude to the international coalition led by the United States, especially for the military and economic support that it provided in the fight against ISIS. The military coalition that the United States led was instrumental in helping the Iraqi forces to emerge victorious in that important battle. But Iran also played a pivotal role in the war against ISIS, and we share long-standing ties of geography, of water resources, of economy, of culture, and of religion with Iran. Iraq's relations and interests are so inseparably bound to the Arab depth. And needless to say, to Turkey also, which is our northern neighbor, is of major consequence to our interest. Iraq's geopolitics is rather interesting and challenging and vital, to say the least. It is not in our interest to choose to ally with one at the expense of others, so long as our sovereignty and independence is respected. For the Middle East to become stable, no country should seek to dictate to Iraq whom we should have relations with and how. Our policies and our diplomatic and economic ties must be driven by our own national interests, not by those of others. Iraq's sovereignty and stability should be the common interest for our neighbors and for the international actors. And we should not be penalized for protecting our sovereign interest or seeking to strengthen our military independence. The recent call by the Iraqi parliament for the withdrawal of US troops from our country is not a sign of ingratitude or hostility. Rather, it is a reaction to what many Iraqis see as violations of their country's sovereignty. This very crucial issue will have to be resolved through dialogue and by accepting that at the heart of this dialogue must be Iraq's sovereignty and enduring stability. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to argue that security and prosperity in Iraq will not be possible unless the Middle East as a region finds a way to move beyond the instability and the conflicts of today. The ravages of relentless violence and confrontation bring nothing but suffering to our people, robbing them of the futures they deserve. I still believe, despite the odds of the day, that Iraq can be the catalyst for positive change. It is not just that the country has, since Mesopotamian times, been the cradle of civilization and the melting pot of different faiths, sects, and ethnicities. Few countries have faced the horrors of war, of violent repression, of chemical attacks, and mass graves and sanctions, and of sectarian and ethnic bloodshed as mine has. And few crave peace and stability more. These bitter experiences have taught us that despite our differences, there is more that binds us together than keeps us apart. The protesters are yet another sign of this. Their patriotism, commitment to Iraq is demonstrated daily in the streets of Baghdad. We have shared dreams and mutual interest in cooperating and achieving those dreams. Crucially, we have learned that we can only achieve these dreams if we are united in a common aim and with a common purpose. This is a lesson for our region as well. Prosperity depends on eradicating extremism and teaching inclusiveness. It depends on building bridges, not slamming doors. Regional frameworks for security and economic and commercial cooperation that provide an avenue for political dialogue and dispute resolution is needed. We should seek to find our own solutions to our own problems. This is what young Iraqis in their thousands are demanding in peaceful protest on the streets of Baghdad and other cities, which they began nearly 4 months ago. It is devastating and painful and even shameful that acts of violence by outlaws has led to the death of over 600 innocent peaceful protesters, mostly young people, as well as many security personnel. Needless to say, I condemn these crimes in the strongest terms, and the perpetrators, sooner or later, will have to be dealt with in accordance with the law. Justice and security are the basis of a state and a society, of a nation. Peaceful protest is a fundamental right. Young Iraqis are protesting for a better life, a homeland, more jobs, improved services, an end to crippling corruption that has blighted the country for far too long. I hope I'm genuine with myself and with you when I say I want the same for them. They want an Iraqi nationhood to be inclusive, not divided according to communal identity. They want a democratic political system and a fair electoral law, which we have recently passed, that can ensure free and fair elections. This is a generational shift that reflects a yearning for something better, something more. This will not be an easy process, nor can it be achieved overnight. We certainly need to restore Iraqis' trust in their government and to re-examine our laws and our constitution to see how they can be made to renew and strengthen the bonds between the Iraqi leadership and our people and our communities. We also need to establish the conditions for sustained economic growth and to create jobs for our young and the rapidly growing population. Youth unemployment is already rampant and will only get worse if we do not provide our young people with the education and skills they need to succeed. 65% of Iraq's 38 million people are under the age of 30. Iraq has the highest fertility rate in the Middle East, and its population will grow by 1 million per year over the coming decade. These demographic and economic realities cannot be denied or dealt with by the status quo. The Iraqi state cannot do this on its own. The public sector is already strained, and we need to boost our still nascent private sector and look to those gathered here today to do their part by bringing foreign investment and skills to Iraq. We understand that we have a crucial role to play in making this reality. We need to become a country where Iraqis and foreigners have the confidence to invest for the long term and where the private sector feels empowered. As such, we have established legal and regulatory foundations to protect investors and liberalize markets. Needless to say, corruption needs to be combated. This is the political economy of conflict and instability. Good governance and rule of law needs to be established in practice, and many other reforms that are needed in order to move beyond the present impasse. I have to say, we have benefited throughout these difficult times from the guidance and the influence of Marja'iyya in Najaf, especially His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sistani, whose leadership in these difficult and challenging times have been most helpful to Iraq and to encourage tolerance and peace and commit to reforms. And I very much hope that, speaking for all, that we hope that he will have speedy recovery from his recent surgery. Najaf historically has been the center of gravity for moderation, tolerance, and communal coexistence. And their role has been absolutely important in recent times. The reconstruction and restoration of the areas destroyed in the fight against ISIS remain a priority. But if we are to achieve our potential in the long term, our ambitions must go far beyond that. We need new ports, highway networks, railways, airports, many, many other things. And many of you here, no doubt, will be thinking, the country is in this state of conflict. We are in the eye of storm, and we are still thinking and enumerating the kind of projects and the reforms that Iraq needs. While focusing on the problems of today, we really need to offer the hope of what is needed in order to really provide the Iraqis with what they deserve. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave you with these final thoughts. As I have said, these are tough times for Iraq and for the region. I submit to you stabilizing Iraq, resolving Iraq's fundamental political crisis and the crisis of governance, establishing the sovereignty and protecting the independence and sovereign decisions of Iraq should become crucial to the stability of the entire Middle East. For this is crucial to eradicating extremism and can become, by virtue of geopolitics, the bridge that can unite the Middle East through common projects of infrastructure, job creations, and trade instead of continued conflict. As I look around this audience, I see many friends and allies who I know you share our vision, but I also know many of you are disappointed. For Iraq is yet from attaining its potential. Iraqis are yet to attain the minimum of what they deserve in peace, good governance, a decent quality of life, and to be able to enjoy the resources that Iraq has. We know we have no option but to persist and to make sure that Iraq is out of the present crisis and hopefully in the direction that we all aspire to and what the Iraqis deserve. It's going to be a tough challenge, but I count on the help of the international community, of our friends in this important event to make sure that Iraq is really restored, peaceful, sovereign, independent, at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors. And thank you very much.
Mr. President, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Farid.
You said that you had a candid conversation with President Trump. That sounds like diplomatic camouflage. So I want to ask you, how candid was it? Did you explain to him that the Iraqi parliament has passed a resolution asking that U.S. troops leave? And what was his response?
Well, to be fair, President Trump does not mince his words. He's always also very direct and very candid. And I think these are very important times being diplomatic. We had truly a candid conversation, a very serious conversation, and it was a good opportunity to basically explain the dynamics. Yes, the Iraqi parliament has issued a decree calling for all foreign troops to leave. The United States and President Trump has always said it is up to Iraq what it decides and what it needs, so long as this is done with respect and in the proper ways. This is something that the United States and Iraq need to sit down together. This is my conversation with him, that we have the decision and we have a new dynamics and we need to sit down and have a dialogue at the heart of which sovereignty of Iraq, respect of the will of the Iraqi people, and protecting the hard-won stability of Iraq should be the main emphasis. And to a notion that he was, I think, appreciative of these comments, and we went into some further details on these matters. And he also, by the way, pointed to the fact that the number of US troops in Iraq have gone down considerably over the years. I mean, remember the days it was 150,000 troops. Today, the number that he mentioned was about 5,000 or so.
There are many people in the United States who worry that were U.S. forces to leave, both symbolically and actually, it would result in greater and greater Iranian influence in Iraq.
Well, Iraq and Iran are neighbors, and no Iraqi wants to go back to a state of conflict or war with Iran. We have had too many wars. And Iraq and Iran must maintain good relations based on a state-to-state relations, and recognizing this should be both good for Iran and for Iraq. But any effort, by the way, to undermine Iraqi sovereignty, and this is the message I want to say, and many have tried this in the past, this is not working. Iraq is a proud nation, and Iraqis don't accept anything less than full independence and full sovereignty. They want to have good relations. They want to have good relations with the Iranians, as I said. They don't want to go back to a state of conflict with Iran, but undue Iranian influence, or for that matter, undue influence from others is unacceptable. Iraqis won't accept it. And we do see this affirmation of Iraqi sovereignty, Iraqi patriotism. Iraq has been toyed with for far too long. And Iraqis want to reclaim their homeland and want to assert their sovereignty.
There are people who say Qasem Soleimani was a hero. There are people who say he was a terrorist. Which was he?
Qasem Soleimani was quite an icon for Iran and Iranian national security system. I want to be fair as we evaluate these matters, and I have referred to this on many occasions. Qasem Soleimani was there during the war against ISIS. He was with Iraqi forces, different Iraqi forces in different regions of Iraq. And ironically, at a time when you had American drones and American planes providing support missions for some of these military dynamics. So during the war with ISIS, many competing elements in the Middle East, many conflicting parties in the Middle East came together in Iraq in order to defeat ISIS.
The Prime Minister of Iraq, Adel Abdul Mahdi, has said that at the time he was killed, Soleimani had a message that he was taking to the Saudi Arabian government for a kind of reconciliation, or perhaps the beginning of a reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that that is untrue. You spoke with Soleimani before he, I don't know how much earlier, but you were aware of what he was doing. Did he in fact have a message to Saudi Arabia?
I am not aware of that. I've heard this from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said that publicly, but also told me privately that he was working on some initiative with the Saudis, but I was not in the loop, to be fair, on the specifics of this matter.
The U.S. strategy, as far as one can tell, toward Iran seems to be squeeze it, more sanctions, more pressure, and the idea is either they will agree to a much more substantial nuclear deal with much longer time horizons, perhaps including ballistic missiles and the like, or some people believe it's an attempt to actually overthrow the regime. Which do you think it is, and will either strategy work?
I think at the end of the day, Iran is a major geopolitical actor, is a major country in that part of the world. And if you look back at why the Middle East in the mess it is in now, I can go back probably to the Iraq-Iran war, the collapse of regional order. One thing led to another, and we are moving from one conflict to another. At the end of the day, my urging, this part of the world has been a headache for everybody. Many people might have thought it is their battles and they can finance it by themselves, and we have seen the scourge of extremism coming out of here and plaguing the entire world. This region needs to be fixed. We need a new regional order. This cannot be done without the Iranians. This cannot be done without the Turks. This cannot be done without the Arab world coming together. And seriously, if you look at the geopolitics of it, and I hope you don't accuse me of being Iraq-centric, it is Iraq, it's Mesopotamia. This has always been the case.
But you're saying engage with Iran.
I'm saying, of course.
So are the sanctions counterproductive?
Well, sanctions, Iraq was under sanctions under Saddam Hussein. Sanctions often lead to a lot of suffering of innocent people. And obviously, from that experience, this is something that I have to be concerned about. Iran is my neighbor, and I don't want any ill to come to its people. At the end of the day, we need dialogue. We need people to sit on a table and really hammer these issues out. We have no other choice. Too much is at stake. Look at the amount of resources being squandered in these senseless conflicts that lead to nothing. I mean, you have seen conflict in Europe and other places sometimes lead to changes, but in our part of the world, is one conflict to another, is basically throwing away the resources that are acquired. Instead of building schools, we are building these conflict dynamics that has no end in sight.
So aren't we in a very dangerous moment, though, because the U.S. is tightening the pressure. The Iranians
it is a dangerous moment.
Right, the Iranians do not seem about to capitulate. Couldn't that then lead to another miscalculation, another military conflict?
I think the environment is so unstable, so dangerous. We all need to be worried and concerned. And certainly in the case of Iraq, and I go back to Iraq as well, Iraq is very fragile, very precarious. The stability that we have acquired after years of conflict against ISIS was not easy. It could easily unravel. We are already seeing signs of ISIS coming back. The implications of the conflict in Syria, the dynamics in Idlib, are all very, very serious. We are now talking about a regional conflict. At the same time, the issue that has consumed us all over the past few years, namely ISIS and terrorism, is beginning to come back. And I'm sure if we are not careful, this is gonna plague us and will really make us all face to an ugly reality. So yes, Farid, this is a dangerous moment. The Middle East does not need another conflict.
Did you tell this to President
We have
Trump?
had a very good conversation with the President, and we had a very candid conversation, and the need for basically restraint, calming things down. This is not the time for another conflict. In my conversations with many actors in the region, almost everybody is saying this is getting out of hand. Please cool it down, restraint. And I tell you what, from Iraq, and I have explained to you the dynamics of this country that has seen 40 years of conflict. Our young people are demanding jobs. We need reforms. We need to rebuild the territories that ISIS has destroyed. We have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people still in refugee camps. These are the priorities. We talked about the demographics of Iraq. We need today, we need 12,000 new school buildings. New school buildings. I'm not talking about renovating the school buildings that already exist. It is about jobs. If it is true in the United States, it's true in my country too as well. It's true in the Middle East too as well. So I can say it with as much passion as I can muster. This part of the world does not need another conflict, because look at the past decades of war and conflict. What have they have achieved? Only squandering resources and more people made homeless and more extremism propping up.
You're a Kurd. Do you think the U.S. administration's decision to abandon the Syrian Kurds was wise, and what is the consequence on the ground today in northern Turkey?
Well, the United States affirmed to us that they have not abandoned the Syrian Kurds.
But you see what's happened on the ground.
There were moments that this was a major issue. There is an ongoing relationship that exists, and the Syrian Kurdish movements have really been instrumental in taking on ISIS, and they have proven to be a reliable force against extremism. At the end of the day, we now talk about ISIS in Syria and Syrian Kurds. Look at the conflict in Syria, Farid. I mean, really, if you look at it, years on from this senseless conflict, what has changed? People have been made homeless. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent peoples have been killed. Extremism have propped up. A beautiful country totally devastated. And everybody is trying to bring together a peace process that essentially may well restore some form of the status quo ante. And this is an awful lesson. And we better learn from that experience in Syria. It's painful.
There are a lot of Americans, including President Trump, who say the Iraq war was the biggest disaster, it was a mistake, it wasn't worth it. What do you say to those Americans?
Look, if I were an American, I would have a lot of second thoughts about that episode. And I have said in my remarks also, many of our friends, including those in the United States, have been disappointed that the transition in Iraq was difficult, was painful, and did not achieve what we all hoped for on the eve of the war. I remember in 2003, in January 2003, the first time I came to Davos, I came with a number of Iraqi oppositionists, including the present-day Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi. He was here. We sat in this hall, talked about what Iraq could be like. In all honesty, I have to be honest with myself, honest with you, honest with the people of Iraq. Iraqis did not get to where they wanted to. So I can understand the disappointment, I can understand the pain. But getting rid of Saddam Hussein could not have been wrong. Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. Saddam Hussein killed people, waged in war, committed genocide. And if you go to the mass graves of the south, or to Halabja, or to some of these places, Janine is from the United Nations, representative of the United Nations. She and I went to a newly discovered mass grave in the desert of Samawa. People who were Kurds, who were taken during the Anfal campaign. So when you saw those things, you see those things, there is no way that removing Saddam Hussein was a bad thing. It was a good thing. But I have to admit, we could have done a lot better, and we did not deliver for the Iraqis or for the friends of Iraq. And I hope we can do better this time.
President Saleh, always a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.